And I remember thinking in those moments that she was going to die, even though I didn't really know what that meant, but I knew that.
Hi, everyone, and I want to welcome to the show Melissa Armstrong. Melissa, welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here and chat with you today.
Absolutely. Now, on today's show, we are discussing the impact childhood trauma has, not just on a physical level, but how it leads to physical illnesses and the struggles that we face during recovery, as well as the financial impact it has in our lives. So, Melissa, can you share a little about your childhood and what it was like growing up?
Sure. Yeah. I grew up in a very chaotic, abusive household. My parents were both addicts, and my dad was very physically abusive toward my mom and my older brother, who had a different dad. Um, he, as a result of their addictions, we had very little money. Like, we didn't have a kitchen table because we just couldn't buy one. So us kids ate off of a suitcase in the kitchen. My parents would often have all kinds of random people in the house, as you would expect with all of the addiction. And um, my dad's drug of choice was heroin. So he used to like shoot heroin at the kitchen, like in the kitchen. Um, him and his friends would all just sit around in the kitchen or the garage. And yeah, it was very chaotic, and he would be very abusive toward my mom and my brother, like right in front of. I'm one of four. My brother um was older than me, and then my sisters are younger than me. And so just in front of us all, with no concept of what that was doing to us. My parents divorced when I was about 6 or 7. And from there, my dad, was in and out of rehab, and my mom eventually got clean, but still struggled with her own trauma, from, being an abusive relationship with my dad and my brother's dad, and all of her own childhood trauma. So she really couldn't be a super present, loving, attentive parent like what I needed. Um, that's kind of how it went
How
for
it
my whole
went.
child. Yeah.
So, how old were you about, like, when your mother finally decided to leave this abusive relationship that she realized this isn't the right thing to be in?
Yeah, I was about 6 or 7 when my dad left. And they got divorced, and he never came back. So it was really like, I think she knew how bad it was for us, because we would just be in the living room, and all of a sudden my dad would just start hitting her, and
Yeah,
we would run away. So like, I think she just knew in her gut, in her soul, that that wasn't right.
that
So
wasn't the right. That's very brave of just her of making that decision because a lot of times women in abusive relationships feel like they don't have a way out, right? They have a fear for their life. That was the case for my mom and my dad. My dad was also very physical and mentally abusive, but my mom never had the courage to leave the relationship. She was actually in fear for her life and ours. She actually believed in her soul that if she left, my dad would kill her.
mm,
So she chose to stay and endure the abuse longer than she should have ever. Um, but being so young, that must have had a tremendous impact on you. And, what can you describe how the trauma that you experienced affected you as, became a teenager into your early 20s?
Yeah, so I remember very vividly being very young. Like I currently have a 3 and 8 year old boys, both of them. And I remember being like my youngest's age, like 3, 3 and a half, watching, like I have vivid memories when I close my eyes of like watching my dad beat my mom. And I remember thinking in those moments that she was going to die, even though I didn't really know what that meant, but I knew that like that was obviously very bad. And as like when they got divorced, I first, as kids do, right, they make it all about, they are very um focused on their self. So like, at 6 or 7, when my dad left, I was convinced that it was my fault. And I just really longed so much for my dad to be around and to have a normal family. Um, my mom was still very obviously traumatized, like I said, and was still very she wasn't really physically abusive, but she was very verbally abusive. And um, she just couldn't love us because she didn't love herself. And she had so much trauma herself. So as a result, I tried really hard to perform. So I would do, like, I was a straight A student my whole school. Like, I always did above and beyond at school. I would cook and clean the house for my siblings and, take care of my younger sisters, and kind of always tried to do things to get my mom to notice me and love me like what I needed and wanted. And I started manifesting a lot of like anxiety. And then when I was 11, I was molested by my, at the time, best friend's grandfather. And that created obviously more, you know, issues with trusting adults, and just severe, severe anxiety. And at the same time, my body was changing because I was going through puberty, and just really not sure about safety because my mom was super poor and we were on food stamps, and we couldn't afford to pay, you know, anything extra. I felt like an outcast at school because, my friends were, or people at school were getting, nice clothes, or when we started driving, everybody got a car and I didn't. And then when I was 15, there was a shooting at my high school. And that was probably one of the like big downhill turns in my life. I mean, obviously all of it was affected me greatly, but at that point when the shooting happened, the panic set in. And I had severe complex post-traumatic stress disorder after that. The shooter was a friend of mine. He was at my house the night before it happened. I did not know about the shooting, but I was felt very guilty that I didn't know about it. Although, how could I have known? Because he didn't tell me.
Right.
But I just had panic beyond like words can even describe, where like a loud noise, somebody walking into a room would just absolutely set me off. I would just start crying. Like literally just somebody walking into a room would,
Right. It would
if I
just
just
trigger,
startled, yeah, if I
yeah, it
got
would trigger.
startled.
So that, do you think is what I find is sometimes there's an experience later on in life that triggers the initial trauma that we probably don't remember as much. So, like the sounds, that might have subconsciously reminded you of the sounds your dad would make when he was beating up your mom and, hitting her or crashing things. So, like those crashing noises, it kind of triggers something within the body like, oh my God, there's a crisis going on. So we got to prepare for fight or flight mode. and then
Yeah.
the, anxiety comes or the panic attacks comes. Do you feel like probably that's what it was? It was triggering all those old memories of your early childhood experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was definitely a part of it. In addition to just triggering like the feeling of fear and uncertainty of the actual shooting itself, it would definitely throw my nervous system into searching for whatever danger was present. And it took me a long time to get out of that chronic fight or flight mode for sure.
Wow. So, what was that experience like with the anxiety? Because anxiety, could be experienced differently between individuals. Sometimes it's a combination of depression. It's more depression than the anxiety. Sometimes it's like severe anxiety where you're constantly on the alert. So, can you just describe just a little bit of what was that experience was like with the anxiety or living with it?
Yeah, it was really the anxiety was so severe that I would have symptoms of like shaking and like I've always felt anxiety in my like abdomen and my gut, and it
Hmm.
feels like this almost like aching open emptiness. Um and the panic that was associated with that led to like an inability to sleep. When I would try to close my eyes, I would just be like startled awake from the nightmares or just the feeling of being unsafe. Um, I had trouble eating, and at some points in my late teen years, I was very suicidal and was in and out of you know uh, mental hospitals because I was threatening to take my life because I just wanted the pain to end.
Well, for sure, right? For good reason, because it's unless you've gone through it, you wouldn't be able to understand the immense pain that's experienced
Yeah.
inside. Um, Now, with these traumas, there's the physical impact that we experience. So, what were some of the physical symptoms that you ended up getting from all of this as a result of all these experiences and the anxiety? And I see that probably some depression in there as well that you've experienced.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I had severe anxiety, severe depression, and severe panic. I would categorize them all as severe. So I kind of from the time that I was about, in my early teen years until I was 18, I just kind of lived in this chronic fight or flight state. And so it wasn't really until like my late teen years, like 18, 19, 20, in early 20s, that I started developing physical symptoms. And that was after so the shooting happened when I was 15. And then when I was 18, my brother was killed. My older brother, who was 5 years older than me, was killed in front of me. And so that's when I really started to, again, just severe panic. Like I would be up for days at a time, like just awake because I couldn't sleep. I couldn't even bear to close my eyes because I was just so panicked and anxious and depressed. And I started having horrible digestive issues because um I couldn't eat. And then if I did eat, I couldn't digest my food because I was just in this chronic fight or flight, so worried about everything, panicked about everything, so anxious, so depressed. I started getting rashes all over my body. Um, I had horrible headaches. That was pretty much like the real top physical symptoms that I have, but I was a complete wreck. Like I was not eating much, but I was gaining weight, but I was also not sleeping at all. And then coupled with all the other physical symptoms and the mental symptoms, I was an absolute wreck.
So, what was the turning point for you that led you to your recovery process?
So when I was 18 and my brother died, I always knew, even at a young age, that I wanted to be in medicine. In some way, I used to tell my mom that I was going to be a pediatrician because when I was like 5, I loved taking care of my sisters and like they were like my little babies. I would always call them my little babies. And So I always kind of knew that I would be in it, helping people or in medicine in some way. And so when my brother died, I realized that I wanted to be a nurse. The nurses in the hospital after his accident were just absolutely angels on earth is the only way to describe them. They were phenomenal. And I was 18 and I obviously witnessed what happened to him. So I was very traumatized and they just really like comforted me and the rest of my family. And I was like, I want to do that. I want to help people with that. So I immediately started on that journey. Simultaneously, my physical health and my mental health were not good, and I was in my early 20s. I would say probably like 21, 22, 23 maybe, when the panic was so bad when I was going through nursing school and just about to graduate, that I was really unsure of my ability to even like be a nurse, because how can I help people if I'm like this unwell myself? And there was a conversation that I had with my now husband, my boyfriend at the time, where he was like, "Why have you ever, like, it sounds like you need something to calm you down. Like, have you ever tried meditation? Like maybe meditation would help you." And that's really, I'd say, the turning point. So I started meditating, and initially right away I didn't notice any change, but it was not very long. It was very quickly that I realized, oh my goodness, I can actually calm myself down. And I had never in my whole entire life felt calm and
Not
peace.
even the times where you're hospitalized for the
No,
suicidal, like none of those treatments or at the
no,
hospital.
no. I never felt that. I remember feeling numb, but I never remember feeling calm and peace. Um, because I was heavily medicated from the time that I was 15 until I was in my early 20s. Um, and so I started meditating and I noticed pretty quickly that I was able to get to a sense of like, oh my gosh, I feel calm. And it was really, I started just consuming a lot of content about like meditation and like why does it work, and different types of meditation. And I learned about like neuroplasticity, which is the ability of your brain to rewire itself. I learned more, through my nursing training, and then obviously on my own as well, and into my nursing career, more about the nervous system and what it does and why I was in this chronic fight or flight state, and like how so much of what I had been through was really like still with me because I hadn't processed those emotions and those traumas.
Yeah, and when we don't process those emotions, they get trapped somewhere, and the body doesn't know what to do with them.
Yeah, I always say energy, or excuse me, emotion is energy in motion.
Yep.
So if you have emotion that we're all energy, like everything is energy, right? So like if you have that, just imagine like a big ball of emotion and you don't process through it, it stays in your body. And while that one ball might not affect you, when you have another ball from another emotional situation and you add that to the one that's already there, and then another one that you add that, and then another one, and then another one, then all of a sudden your body can't process, you can't cope
Yeah,
until you
and it can't
process through that.
function correctly.
Mhm.
Now you
Correct.
mentioned, the stomach area a lot during your childhood where you felt like you couldn't even process the food, you couldn't eat. So, did you develop any symptoms in your stomach area later on in life?
Yeah, I had horrible digestive issues. I had like IBS symptoms basically.
And how did you treat those?
Well, it was really as I started, I mean, initially I would go to the doctor and I would
Hmm.
be given a pill and told that could take this pill and it would make me better for my anxiety, for my rashes, for my GI symptoms. Oh, you have high, like I remember the doctor told me I had GERD. Take Zantac or take, whatever pill. And so it wasn't really until I started processing the emotional pieces of the things that I had been through and the trauma that I had been through that I really started to see changes in those symptoms. They slowly started to diminish.
Yeah, absolutely. And the stomach area is something that, it's pretty common, between individuals with severe trauma. And I see it, over and over again. So, it's something for, whoever's listening to kind of think about if you have IBS, if you have those symptoms that, and if you also have childhood trauma, there might be a connection there, you know. Um, Now, as far I know your parents didn't have barely anything. So the impact of watching your parents deal with money, how you hardly had any resources, how did that impact you growing up and as an adult when it came to, let's say, your finances and your ability to manifest? Or the ability to have a good job versus just a mediocre job.
Yeah, that is such an interesting question. I love that question. So we didn't have any money. So there was always this kind of scarcity mindset. Um, and I remember when I thought my dad left because of me, it was because I had outgrown my shoes. And there was a hole in my shoes. And I remember telling my mom, like, there's a hole in my shoes. I need new shoes. And then, like, the next day, to me in my head, it was the next day. I don't actually know if it was the next day. I was 6 or 7. So it could have been, who knows, maybe 2 months later.
Right.
I don't know. But like, it seems like almost right away, my mom told me, like, your dad's leaving. And I remember being like, I don't need new shoes. It's fine. Like, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That obviously wasn't the problem, but I learned to not ask for things because I knew that I couldn't have them. And then into my adulthood, I really had a feeling of um, unsafety um, with money, surrounding money.
Like, I don't deserve this. I don't deserve nice things
Not so
or
much I don't deserve it, but like if I don't have like $10,000 in the bank to pay my bills, like even when we were paying my bills, I moved in with my now husband. He was my boyfriend when I was like we met when I was 16. So my mom was emotionally unavailable and really didn't care where I was. So I pretty much moved in with him right away. And he was at the time, he was 3 years older than me. So he was already graduated from high school and had a job. And even if we were paying our rent and had food in the fridge and all of that, like I always felt like, but I don't have enough money to pay my rent next month right now. So I was always fearful of like, what's going to happen? We're going to lose our place to live. We're going to lose, we're not going to have any food. We're not going to have, how are we going to do that? That was a long process. And I would say probably well into my 20s, how I struggled with that. For some reason, I have always had, and like, is it nature or nurture? Like, I've had this conversation with a lot of people because I've always had this inherent belief that I can do anything. Like, I just believe in my ability to get the job that I want. Like, the first job that I got out of nursing school was my dream job. And I just knew, like, I remember being in nursing school telling my friends, like, I'm going to work there. And they're like, okay, that's like, there was like 2 spots and like 500 applications. And I got one of the 2 spots. And it wasn't even a question to me. Like, it was, I was going to get it. So I feel like I've always been able to manifest things and experiences and things that I want. Um, and it sounds very contradictory because I did have like kind of those money wounds. That's definitely been something that I had to work on. And I'd say that I finally, like in the last several years, I finally got into a place where I I just know that money comes and money goes. And I don't have, it's not tied to my security anymore. Um, and I know that I can rely on myself. So
The fear is no longer there, that fear that you used to have.
yeah,
That's very interesting. So I'm going to ask you this from a spiritual perspective. And I find like with a lot of individuals that I talk to, there's always like the spiritual, I don't want to say it's a gift, but a spiritual element in their life that helps them carry them through to even today. So do you think this knowing was always there,
100%.
like even
Yeah.
as little as you were, like you knew you're gonna have a place to live, or you knew that you were gonna have food?
Yeah. I would say when I was little, I didn't know that I was going to have a place to live. Like, we did have periods of homelessness when I was little. We lived at like a lake in a tent for weeks, months at a time. But I didn't necessarily know that there was going to be food or a place to live, but I always knew that I was protected. Um, and it's very interesting. This is another super interesting question because my parents were not religious at all. And my mom used to look for opportunities to prove to us that God was not real. And like, she used to tell us, like, when my brother died, my brother was 23, I was 18. He has 3 children. And she was like, see, like, God is not real, because if God was real, he wouldn't have taken Justin away from his babies. And but it was so interesting to me because I remember being very, very young and remember and knowing that I wouldn't live like that and that there was something more for me. So it was 100%. And then as I grew, like in my early 20s, and I started meditating, that's really when my spirituality and like my connection with um, my higher power, started to develop. And I think now I use that, I rely on that very heavily. And I know, like, God will always provide for me. And he always has.
Oh wow, that's amazing. So have you found like some type of religion for yourself through
I'm a
this
Christian.
process? Amazing. And now that your life has shifted and you've gone through this experience, um, how is your relationship now compare, let's say, with your siblings and with your mom and dad? How has that developed through the years?
That's complicated. My dad is deceased. My dad, drugs took him. My brother's obviously deceased. My 2 younger sisters, um, my my next youngest sister is 11 months younger than me. She has Down syndrome. So she lives full time with my mom. And then my next youngest sister is 13 months younger than her. Um, I do not have a great relationship with my youngest sister. She is very, her, um, my experience in our childhood is very different from her experience in our childhood. My mother was very verbally abusive to me. My youngest sister was the baby. So, and then also, like, my dad was very physically abusive to my mom and my brother, as a result, was very physically abusive to me. And me, as a result, I was very physically abusive to my youngest sister when we were really little. And it's something that I regret very deeply. Um, to her, I can't speak for her, obviously, I guess, but not I guess. I can't speak for her, but I think that she has a lot of she hasn't dealt with the trauma, her own trauma.
Right.
And then she it is struggling to be able to forgive that. So it's better for her that we don't have a relationship. So we don't speak at all.
Yeah.
I've tried to reach out to her many, many times, and she
Yeah.
doesn't respond. My relationship with my mom is healing. My mom has done a lot of healing work of her own. And just recently, in the last 6 months, we've started building our relationship back. Um, we used trauma informed um, coach.
Techniques.
Yeah, well, we got a coach to help who specializes in estranged adult child parent relationships, who we've been working with to help build our relationship. And it's actually really, like, grown into something that's really, it's started to become something really beautiful again, which is really, really incredible. And I feel like I'll be 40 next year. So I feel like I've kind of gotten to a place too where I've forgiven her finally for everything that she did. I know that she did the best she could, and it really, like, we all had the cards stacked against us before we even started, like,
Yes.
the trauma goes so far back in all of there's so much addiction and abuse and everything in both sides of my family. Like, my mom was not immune to that. Her mom was very abusive to her, and as a result, she was abusive to me. So it's like you almost can't even, and then everything that happened with my dad and my
Yeah.
brother's dad,
So it's
so
like a whole generation, the
yeah,
cycle that was just so continuous. And
multiple generations, yeah.
yeah, and here you are trying to heal,
Mhm.
this whole generation, this whole cycle. Of course, you're not going to be perfect. Nobody's going to come out of these experiences as a Buddha. You know what
Mhm.
I mean? We're going to, the impact is severe that, yeah, we are prone to hurting other people through the process because we have to deal with the pain and you, you just can't control that. Plus, you don't know until you go through the healing process. And if you don't have anyone to guide you, I found, like, during my teenage years where I became aware of my depression, my anxiety, and I was seeking for help, I just found people that felt sorry for me and felt sorry for my circumstance, but not necessarily people that could actually help or offer help or call 911 or call the cops or do something. So, did you have anybody in your life, a grandma, grandpa, a neighbor that was there that could have helped you or at least gave guidance? Anyone?
No, not really. Um, like I said, my family, my mom's, I didn't have any relationship with my dad's side of the family. They're all in New York, and um I never had a relationship with them. And then when my dad left when I was really young, like, I hardly even talked to him ever, but once every couple of years until he died. And then my mom's side of the family is so dysfunctional and unwell, all of them, with all of the trauma that they've been in, and the addiction that they've all experienced. So no, not really. I think maybe, you know, a teacher from time to time, but I can't really recall anybody that
Your
really
husband?
like my husband. Actually, forgive me for not saying my husband. I should have. Um, Gosh, that's a real oversight that I didn't even consider that. But yeah, I was looking for like an adult, but obviously, he is slightly older than me. So he was incredible when I mean, is incredible, but he supported me so much when we were really young, and continues to do so now, and just really has loved me through all of the.
Challenges that you
Yeah.
faced?
Yeah.
Wow, what an incredible story. Now, how has this experience influenced what you are doing now?
So I became a nurse when I was in my early 20s, and then I kind of quickly realized that the same thing that I was getting met with when I would go to the doctor, here, take this pill, or here, like, sorry, that's just, I had multiple doctors tell me like depression's incurable, take these antidepressants, or you're going to have anxiety for the rest of your life, here's some anxiolytics, or things like that. Very, very little time and attention went into my care, and I wasn't getting the support that I needed. And I realized as I transitioned into my nursing career that that's kind of what the model in our country is. It's a broken system. And don't get me wrong, if I'm ever in a car accident, like, I joke about this all the time, like, don't you dare bring me to my basement. That's where I work now. But like, thank God for ICUs and ERs and ORs and
Right.
modern medicine. We need that. But as far as prevention
Mental,
and
yeah,
true health care, that model sucks. It's a sick care system is what it is. And you're met with pills and procedures, because the hospital systems and the networks are beholden to the insurance model, the insurance industry, and the pharmaceutical industry. It's a broken system. I think the doctors and nurses that are in the system really want to help people, but their hands are really tied, and some of them don't even know. They're really, that's what they've been taught.
right.
Physicians are not taught about nutrition in medical school. Traditional physicians, MDs, are taught about, this is the diagnosis, here's the pill to fix that.
Yeah.
So I quickly realized that at the beginning of my nursing career. And I realized, and I always knew in my soul that I was going to help people in a different way. Um, when I really, like, I feel like, came out of the fog of my own health journey and really started to feel like the best I've ever felt, was about 6, 7, 8 years ago, maybe. It's probably about 8 years ago. And I um, was like, I want to do something different. And I started pursuing um, more information, more education about, like, I've heard about functional medicine, which is more about like root cause and what's okay. You have headaches. Why? We're like, let's figure out what is the imbalance within your body that's making you have the headaches. Because I believe that the body is inherently designed to heal,
Hmm.
that we don't need a pill to fix something. We need to fix the imbalance so that the body can heal itself.
And the
And
headache is just the communication between the body trying to communicate with you. Hey, there's
exactly.
something wrong, whether it's physical, right, an imbalance, or it's an emotional.
Yeah. And so I started pursuing just education about that, and eventually wound up getting multiple certifications. And with the idea that eventually I would open my own practice and function independently. I also have 2 little boys, like I already shared. So I wanted the flexibility and the independence to make my own schedule around their schedule because first and foremost, my priority is to them. And I want to be a present mother. I want to be able to pick them up from school and attend their school functions and their basketball games and those kinds of things. So I ended up eventually opening at the beginning of last year. I opened my own private practice, and now I help women overcome trauma and the physical manifestations that result from unhealed trauma to heal their whole mind, body, and spirit. Um, yeah.
That's wonderful. Now, you also, I believe you have uh, dived into natural remedies as well. And can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, so I practice holistic medicine. So I do think that most everything in our body, like physical symptoms, imbalances that we have, are almost always tied to some unhealed emotional wound and our lifestyle, and including diet. So I believe that nutrition is a huge piece. The food that you eat really impacts every function in your body. So I don't necessarily practice like like natural remedies as far as like, um, herbs and stuff. I do recommend herbs for certain healing protocols. I do a lot of like gut healing, so I do use that for my gut healing protocols. But yeah, I really focus on healing emotional trauma wounds and lifestyle and diet.
Awesome. So, how can people reach out to you if they would like to get in contact with you? Where can they find you?
So my website is holistichealthbymelissa.com. And then I'm on every social media platform at Holistic Health by Melissa.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Melissa, for coming on and sharing your story and your journey. Thank you so much for being courageous to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. Please subscribe, like, and share so that I can get more of these stories out to you. Until next time.